Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atakura, hi tio, hi huka, he hauhu, te hau moriora.
James Thomas. And also Councillor James Thomas.
And Mike Montgomery, the alternate from Waipart.
No, Mike. Our minutes are 5th of December 2024, commencing on page 8. Someone like to move receipt of those minutes? Carolyn, second for those. Chair Pamela. Any matters requiring clarification or correction in terms of those minutes? None. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. And then item 6.1, page 17, is the future-proof public transport subcommittee minutes, commencing on page 17. Moved by Chair Pamela. We're just receiving these. Seconded by Mayor Adrian. No further discussion on those. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. So we'll now move to item 7.1, Implementation Advisors Report, page 25. Robert.
Okay. Right, so just 3 things I want to highlight in this report. Firstly, there's a little bit of a acknowledgement that we're in a fluid environment in terms of the future of the Resource Management Act and emerging national direction around some of the existing national policy statements. We're tracking that work. It will affect what Future-Proof needs to do in the future. We understand there is still likely to be some reissuing of the National Policy Statement for Urban Development in around about May. That'll help us determine whether or not we have to prioritise another review of our future development strategy, or we can wait until the RMA reforms have run their course. Second thing I thought to highlight, there's one orange on the report. We had in our program, in our implementation plan, to develop a water strategy for Future Proof to replace the one that we had last reviewed in around about 2015, I think, or 2012. That piece of work we've put on hold, given the amount of effort that the partners are having to put into setting up the two water services entities. It's just a crowded environment, and you don't need us complicating that with Future Proof doing strategy work at the same time as these two new organizations are being stood up. So the Waters technical team are just having a look at that work now to see if there's anything within the scope of the strategy that doesn't require support from the water services entities that they might be able to advance. And then the third thing to note is on page 31 in my report on Hamilton Southern Links, I had left in a note about this idea, the concept of a network plan, which is a thing we had for the Waikato Expressway, where we documented all of the supporting local authority planning and transport investments that were required to ensure that the Waikato Expressway was able to achieve its investment objectives. I had intended to have a little bit of a report here, but in light of where NZTA are at in terms of their ability to share information on the progress of that project, I thought it was a bit premature to put up the network plan item in this agenda. So that'll come to your next meeting with a bit more scope once we hopefully have a bit more clarity about what NZTA's intent are in terms of the integration of Hamilton Southern Links with the broader transport network. That's it.
Okay. Chair Pamela.
Kia ora. Hey, thanks for this, Robert. Just in terms of the water strategy review, just flagging that Waikato Regional Council is also looking at water storage and a water storage strategy. So I just wasn't quite sure whether there's an overlap here, or are we mainly talking about water infrastructure?
Well, that's one of the reasons we were putting it on scope, because it does get into water security, if you like, and we know the security action plan is underway too, and the water services entities are having to think about that in their own context. So the environment got too complicated to do a strategy.
Okay.
Many moving parts.
Okay. And the other question I had was in terms of the retirement villages study. We have so many retirement villages that are being developed, and we know we have an aging population, but we also know what the demographics look like for in the decades that follow. And so I was just wondering if we were also making any commentary about, is anybody thinking what the future of these developments might look like?
Yes.
You used to get what I'm saying,
Yeah,
right?
I do. And
Cool.
that's actually, I should acknowledge here that Kāinga Ora have provided us some extra funding to look into the future demographics and demand in the Waikato, including surveys of future users of retirement villages.
Right.
Trying to give us a more balanced view than just the retirement village view, which is everyone's going to want to live in a Tamaheri or be able to afford to live in a Tamaheri or a Gordonton gated community kind of structure, so that we're actually making a more holistic response to the needs of our aging population. So,
But I suppose my comment, though, was once we move beyond an aging population, what are the, are we ensuring that as we're developing these things, and I get that the focus here is on the infrastructure impact from our planning point of view, but I just want us to encourage some thinking around what next? What could these developments be utilized for next? And are we incorporating that into the design, the planning, the connectivity? So just flagging that we know what the demographics look like 50 years from now. So
that's a really good point. What is their purpose going to be? So I'll make sure. We've got Jim Ebeno sitting in the back. He's the project director for that piece of work. So Jim will make sure that thinking's picked up.
I can speak a bit to that.
You go.
Yeah. Yeah, because we've got several of those developments and developers wanting to do those sorts of lifestyle villages, for want of another word, right? Because it's not necessarily at retirement age, but that sort of thing. But one of the big criticals for us is what comes next, and particularly around big growth nodes like Hamilton and Auckland, like, you know, because that's a relatively small scope of time. And then what do they become? Are they usable for other purposes? And therefore, how do we prioritize that resourcing? So that's a big part of our work program around that stuff. Yeah, for those reasons. But you know, it's a good point to bring up in terms of the overall sub-region and region.
I've got Sarah, then Mayor Adrian.
Thank you. Thanks, Robert, for the report. Gosh, that's loud. I was just interested in, we discussed earlier how we think about prioritization of priority development areas, infrastructure projects, etc., so that we're able, if asked, to communicate what our priorities are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What would be the right process for making sure that that is yes. What about we have the opportunity to discuss?
Yeah. Because we are in this funny environment where the FDS already does sequence development, sequences priorities and sequences critical infrastructure. Or the way we were planning 18 months ago. Fast Track has obviously changed that. I think the answer to the question is that's why we have an annual implementation plan, so we can shift and refocus our priorities on an annual basis as the operating environment changes. You know, we get quick uptake in one place, we don't get any uptake in another. Do we need to pivot which areas we're planning to come forward?
Okay. I'm just thinking there may be more urgency with regional deal conversations to further refine that prioritization.
Yeah, fair point.
So I can leave it
there, and
with
I'll
you
have
to
to think about that rather than trying to answer that
no,
question.
I'm happy with that. Just as long as there's like a action that's noted and we are able to loop back at some point. Thank you.
Mayor Adrian.
Yeah, I just, thanks. I'll just go back to Pamela and Jackie said, we do need to think about what these lifestyle villages are, because people can actually live in their communities amongst in the neighbourhood. Creating these lifestyle villages, are we creating something that could be a challenge in 30 years' time? That's a critical question, because I think at the end of the day, people need to be part of a community as well, not just in their own little village. But yeah, I just really want to reflect on that, get us to reflect on that. It's quite important.
I mean,
Yeah, sorry. I'm just concerned that we're going to end up with an oversupply at some stage. And if these are not developed in a way that there's a different purpose for them, a different group in our community that might utilize these spaces, well, then it
Abandoned or whatever.
Yeah.
Mayor Jackie. Oh, Mayor Jackie.
Yeah, I agree. The Giles, regulatory Giles that we actually have we can only advise, and some of this planning, but I guess in terms of, unless it's under our rulings, right, on a case by case, because I know that one of ours is going through Fast Track as well. So again, the implications of oversight planning on when we've already planned and consider these things is also that high risk factor. I guess thank you for the work program. I guess, and I know we may talk about it later, but I guess in my mind, we've still got other projects or work streams, right? And I guess in this report, I kind of like to see just a spreadsheet of the one line. So it might be all like red or orange or green, or just a line to kind of go work in progress. Because in my head, I'm trying to remember some of them. And I know we're looking at prioritization, but at the end of the day, one page overview of the list. I can show you what we do, but yeah, I guess because I think over time as we do an agenda and possible changes, no disrespect to yourself, we can potentially, are we picking them up and making sure that the due diligence across all of the work streams, and if we don't do it here, where do we do it? That's all. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Don't appear to be any. There's nothing online. Okay, we'll move to.
Yep, I'm happy to move if that's what
Oh,
I'm happy
thanks,
to move to receipt.
Mayor Adrian. I'll have a seconder. Mayor Susan. There's nothing further. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. So we'll move to item 7.2. Starts on page 32. Robert.
Right, so this paper on. So this paper arises from a request from FPIC for us to provide more data and insight into how we're going with implementation of the program, and of any critical issues that might be arising that might require us to adjust our strategy or adjust our priorities. So we've had a first go with your technical staff, worked through a process of looking at each of the transformational moves within the strategy and trying to narrow down the possible ways that we could measure success, possible KPIs, and we were looking in this filter for those KPIs and indicators and measures that we could publish quickly without having to fund additional work. So looking for publicly available data sources that we could call on. We have parked up the water ones at the moment because they're a little bit in the too hard basket and there's so much other stuff going on in the water space. So whilst you've got some drafts in there, they're the most draft of all of the measures because they're the ones that the water team have had the least chance to really align over. My intent was that I'd be able to refine these down to at least 5, 6, maybe 10 indicators that we could incorporate into the next annual report, which would at least give us some data to demonstrate how we're going with achieving the broad outcomes of the strategy. So this is up for your information to show the thinking is going on and to receive any feedback or insight from the members of the committee as to other areas that we should look at or concerns with the approach.
Thanks, Robert. Mayor Jackie.
Yeah, thank you. Really good start. I've got questions on a couple of KPIs, so I just frame up at the beginning a couple of thoughts. Is number 6 at the bottom, we'll be doing about short term, so short, medium, long term would be me, but I understand the short term. I guess I really want to throw it to regional council because it's around PT, because I don't know how the focus to me is around numbers, around housing and things, and without talking about well-beings, but connectivity, absolutely. So I wonder whether there's in that statement around 6, I mean, how are we going to do this, that there should be some connectivity element and or PT. I'm interested in that, and because it's not my wheelhouse really at the moment. That's one thing there, and I know that we're going to go into the KPIs, and I probably know the answer, but even if they're blank, with the KPIs number 1 and number 2 are not there, and even if we have to fill them in later, we've started at 3. Just showing you that I have actually read every single word of your magnificent report. Yeah. But if we've got them in there, we need to at least kind of go what the subject is and what we're going to be embedding in.
Robert.
So the subjects are I'll go to that one first. The subjects are iwi aspirations, which was addressed in the paragraph above until we've had a good conversation with iwi about what their aspirations are. I don't know how to measure it. And then the second one was Te Ture Whaimana, or the river at the heart of everything we do, I think is the wording of the move. But it's effectively how are we achieving Te Ture Whaimana? And again, there's a review of Te Ture Whaimana underway, a whole lot of moving parts. So it was a bit hard to come up with some good measures at this point in time. To the specific question, actually the transport one, if I go to the transformational 3, the public transport measures are actually one of the short-term measures that we can produce quite quickly. So that's the real-time data in terms of journey time for those key public transport journeys that we already have, Comet, Orbiter, etc. The Cambridge one, the Te Awamutu one, are they getting into town at the rates that they were supposed to? So that's an easy one for us to produce. So I'm working with Phil King's team in the transport side to try to turn that into a pretty infographic. I don't know if Phil wants to say anything more.
I would just segue that, and great, you know, we know that, I'm going to reiterate that the Hamilton is the gem of our sub-region and region, but also we are not boundaryless. And so I guess some of those KPIs around PT and across, you know, north, it's that little village north, south or and east. So I don't think that we should always report just into and out of Hamilton, even for our
Okay.
sub-region.
Yeah.
I mean, because there's other pieces of
So
work.
pick up one of the runs up into Auckland,
Or,
the
you
Pocono,
know,
and
what's going across the plains into across Kaimai or whatever. Okay.
Okay.
But I just think that we need to have that boundaryless, not just all about performance into and out of the city, because it's that symbiotic relationship with those other.
Yep.
Sarah?
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of the KPIs, I think if their purpose presumably is to measure the work that Future Proof and its partners are doing and how successful we're being, I think the closer they can be to actual outcomes that we can directly influence as much as possible, the better. Otherwise, it's like, for example, you know, our council through its performance indicators, at least until recently, it's had GDP as one. Well, GDP is influenced by a whole range of factors, a lot completely outside of our control. So it doesn't feel like a particularly then meaningful measure. It could just be the Reserve Bank puts up interest rates and then everything's, you know, suppressed for a period of time, or suddenly we have an influx of immigration. So I just, and even with transport, like I think a good measure could be the rollout of direct and frequent routes and the increase in passengers. And that's probably the biggest opportunity we have for mode shift and emissions reductions from transport, rather than being too broad around emissions in all transport modes and stuff, like honing in on where our biggest opportunity is. So yeah, that's just my feedback.
That's very useful and a useful filter, that one about how much influence can we have, because it's still quite a broad list. Yeah.
Okay, I've got Bruce, then Mayor Susan.
Yeah, thank you. So I've sent Robert my comments really, but I just wanted to amplify on some of those, and I'll pick up first on Sarah's comment. What the system must do is demonstrate cause and effect. And at the moment, there's some issues in the way the whole project has been framed up, in the sense that the outcome statements are extremely broad. And I would say they are so broad in some cases, one would never be able to determine whether anybody had any influence on anything. Now, I don't want to be too harsh, but I think you know what I mean when you read them, right? So you know, I took Transformational Move number 7 as my little case study and fed my comments back to Robert. So when you look at that outcome statement, that is one hell of an outcome statement. And then the question is, because we're talking about key performance measures, is the terminology, key performance measures, and the indicators that would be demonstrating that the performance is being achieved through this program. And I think that's the key point, through this program. So I'd also be wanting some real thought go into the scale at which we're talking about here. Are we talking regional scale? And I'm assuming we're largely focused on sub-regional because it's future-proof. And then we have a local scale, which is represented by the monitoring that is being undertaken by TLAs on some of these matters. So we've got to try and find the sweet spot here so that we're not duplicating efforts across the system in terms of the information that's being gathered, that the information really does demonstrate some form of cause and effect, and that if you want to reduce the number of indicators, that would be one of the filters I would be using. So we need a filter to make the decision around which one of these are we going to retain, because we can't really be affording to do stuff that's already going on in other spaces. And we need a very short list of indicators. Otherwise, this turns into the bigger than Ben-Hur monitoring exercise. And my problem with that is that the system is littered with monitoring exercises with too little focus on implementation. So again, not only cause and effect, but what are the things that we are directly doing to implement the things we want to happen through future proof. And at the moment, I don't get the strong sense of some of that. And I would be also asking the question, where is the best place to spend the money? Is the best place to spend the money on the things we want to have implemented, as opposed to standing back and retroactively monitoring what's going on at the sub-regional scale? So I just want those filters run across the system, and then we'll be in a way better space.
Those are fabulous filters. And I think you also made the point to me about, as a committee, being active about selecting some intermediate outcomes that are kind of break it down and say, within this big transformational move, what's the thing we want to really focus on at the moment, and focus our monitoring on that thing rather than trying to monitor.
Yeah, my main point there was trying to find a solution for the extremely broad outcome statements. So think about the outcome statement, which in the case of the case study that I sent to you, had three major, big, high-level issues, including resilience, if I remember rightly, including natural hydrological and ecological processes, which are massive topics. So some thinking around how would some of those could be reframed as intermediate outcomes that are directly relevant to future proof.
Mayor Susan.
Kia ora. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Look, I just want to acknowledge that this is obviously some really great work done by our member organisation staff, and admittedly it's very much in a drafts phase right now, but I guess I just wanted to perhaps invite going forward there to be a stronger rural lens given to how these are to be shaped up. I guess I looked at it and I couldn't see a lot of our communities in here. There's a very strong urban flavour, which is fantastic, but I just sort of feel there's some missed tricks in amongst the document, and obviously really mindful, of course, of the limitations of Future Proof's mandate and our scope, but I'm also really cognizant of the matters raised by Mayor Jackie a little earlier when we were chatting about this government's appetite for increased productivity in the agri sector, and it begs the question, okay, so how can we as a future-proof grouping impact and enable that? And I guess the place I landed at was connectivity in my head, but look, I'm just inviting staff perhaps to cast that level of inquiry a little further than just the corridors of the economic corridors between and the urban centres, because there are a lot of our residents and ratepayers sit outside of that, and how can we also play a role in terms of capturing what they need and measuring it by way of those KPIs as well. That's all my observation, but yeah, look, great as far as it goes. Thank you.
Thank you. Carolyn, then Chair Pamela.
Thank you. And thank you for the report. Great reading. I'd just actually like to support Mayor Susan's commentary in respect of that rural conversation. I don't see a huge amount of flavour in it, and what we can acknowledge is those strong, thriving rural communities for the betterment of our metro and our urban areas. Whilst noting that as a challenge, clearly connectivity, yes, and transport corridors, but and I draw reference to one of our transformational rules around rural public transport, that doesn't solve the issue around goods and services to those rural communities either. So I think probably we need to be mindful that public transport for rural isn't the be all and end all as well. There's still the need to actually have that focus and that lens about resilient roading and infrastructure in those rural communities. Yeah. Yep. GDP for the betterment of obviously our nation's GDP. We know our Waikato region is our powerhouse of the rural economy, and I think we can actually get some leverage around that if we bring that to the table.
Got Chair Pamela, then Mayor Adrian.
I just wanted to, just on point 4 on page 33, that commentary about no mechanism has been proposed for measuring the achievement of iwi aspirations, and until those aspirations are presented in an agreed format, et cetera. Just wondering what's stopping us from getting an agreed format? What can we do to help encourage that? We all, as I understand it, we all have JMA committees that I would have thought that point could have been discussed around just to progress. Just wondering what's our options here.
It's a capacity equation both on our side and on the iwi side of the table.
Well, whatever we can jointly do. I'm happy to encourage those conversations to happen.
Yeah, Adrian, then Sarah.
Thanks, Bill. You just, I guess, following on from the connectivity story and obviously infrastructure, is how can we influence again the connectivity of technology, you know, with our, because technology is going to be a driver for productivity, and it's not just about roads. This is about communications, and we're already seeing, even in quite urbanised rural areas, if you're looking close to town, for a lack of connectivity around our Wi-Fi and phone connections. So somewhere along the way, while it's not in our directly within us, within this group, we have to find a way to perhaps show that we're thinking about it and capturing it in some way to lobby for improved connectivity in the area. You know, because we're not seen as a really isolated region, probably because we're in the Golden Triangle, but there are some isolated areas. So that's where the challenges sit. Like, I know there's a lot of towers going up to add to connectivity, but we just would be good to have our heads around that maybe a little bit. I don't quite know how we capture that as a KPI. That would be my only question. But when we're trying to be an economic driver in productivity, that is critical for the rural communities.
Sarah.
Thanks, Chair. It supports some of these comments around the focus on the rural sector, because it is critically important for the success of the city as well. Part of the point of future proof is to plan well and use land efficiently, right? Like, so that we move away from the large lot subdivisions that can use up a lot of productive land, and we try and become more packed. So I don't see a KPI actually explicitly in there, unless I missed it, around efficient use of land or something around that, which should be there, given it's part of the key tenets of this. Yeah.
No, I don't think there is one there at the moment.
Mm.
So something for me to think about.
Yeah, because a big part there is how do we use our productive land and make the most of it.
Or protect it.
And protect it, and fast track obviously poses challenges there with a lot of then applications for greenfield expansion and things, but then even then ensuring that those have really good densities supported by things like PT, but so you're making the best use of that land that's right up against the city, and there'll be potentially other examples. Yeah.
Further question? Oh, sorry, Mayor Jackie.
That's okay. Thank you. Happy. Look, I agree with where the discussions. I think they're really thoughtful. So a couple of points. I want to go back to what Bruce was saying at the beginning. Actually, would it be really helpful if Bruce, because it's obviously put a lot of thought into number 7, if especially for these meetings, if we've got some thoughts coming to you that we can share all, so we could kind of better preach around the thinking, because I think that's helpful if we're so that we've got a broader views, whether Bruce can send it or perhaps you can send it on to us if that's. I just think it's helpful to get the thinking and then we've got a better overview.
Yeah, it was done last night in a
Yeah,
hurry.
yeah,
So,
you know.
so absolutely it can be shared. And it was just, you know, some thoughts about how we might frame this up in a more efficient way. And just while I've got the microphone, that comment about efficient use of land. In my case study 7, I also asked about water use efficiency. So making sure the indicator is actually relevant to the thing that we're really interested in. Yeah.
Yes, and don't hold your breath because I haven't finished. But yeah, good. And I can see the thinking around that. So that's why I think it's helpful in this space, even though we're governance and there's possibly a lot of it's operational, but just to give us that overview. So we can proceed. So just a couple of things. Just want to reiterate that rural, and I bet at the end of the day, the Waikato as a whole is systemically rural service towns, including Hamilton, but we're obviously moving forward. So all of those conversations are good around that. So I agree with that. Now, I just wanted to perhaps just expand a little bit. When we're talking about town centres, and because a lot of these KPIs are around averages, all right, and the urban is in particularly our gem of Hamilton and some of our bigger towns, because Cambridge comes to mind for me, and even Te Awamutu, they seem like rather large towns compared to my little towns. But we're doing a bigger piece of work around what I call things from hamlets right through to towns. So our biggest town might be 10,000, but there's a lot of nodes that are urban and have urban services, etc. So I kind of just want to put the urban, how we think about urban in this area without going into too much detail, but there's a lot of complexities around those things, particularly, and so I think you all have that going on. That's just one point. The an overview point, and I'm going to put it on, say, page 37 and 38. Can you just explain, we've got data sources and that page 37 and 38 are brought it to mind, probably also to page 39. Really understand the robust, we want robust raw data so I just want to understand how we got to use specific data sets and how we check in Truthscape the data sets that we're using, and because you were setting there's the raw data setting of our KPIs. So there's two parts as to how many and what we use for data setting and why. Like kind of a bit more understanding of that, and then how do we then make sure that's the right data setting for the level for the KPI to be tracked.
Have an instant answer to that.
That's okay. I just, if it's just like a little work thing, just come back to us. I just think it's appreciate something.
Yeah, so for instance, like where we've identified either using the data portal that Waikato Wellbeings has set up or the WHI has set up, because why did we choose which one to use to generate?
And/or stats and/or Fred Dag or whatever. Okay, I'm just kind of understand that. And also, like, I don't know too much about some of these organisations in depth. Okay, but obviously some of them are regional and we're sub-regional. And if it's about a money thing, I guess we need to have those conversations as well. So I'd just like to kind of have some clarity on those things. Now, a couple of other things that I've got on this as well. We've talked about those corridors and GDP and rural and town. Now, coming to I'll give you an example on page 38, the last one, which is housing affordability. So again, I don't want to make this more complex. However, I looked at things like the average income, the average house price, the medium rent. I would say there's a whole spectrum in that sub-region, and how do we then make this, it's either don't have it in there or how do we make it relevant? I'm interested in how our thinking around how we set these things up.
That's one that we've got the approach still to be worked out, because we're asking ourselves the same question.
And I know it's got a question mark on, but it's also I go to Going back to Bruce's one again around waters, the last one's on page 39, around water quantity, for example, right?
Yeah.
And even water, I'm not going to get into water quality above my pay grade, but when I'm thinking, this is growth driven, a lot of this, our strategies around growth areas, and then we've got KPIs, we want quantity of water being used going down. And I'm trying to, as just one example, so I'm looking at those and thinking, how do we get growth? How do we get economic development? How do we get commercial use, rural, or whatever, inside and out? How do we get population growth, which is all happening? And yet all of those things have got KPIs of water quantities going down. Leave it there.
Good question.
And so, yeah, so I guess it's again, I guess, and again, don't know who Land, Air, Water Aotearoa is. Or as an example, no idea, could be the right people, but again, just trying to make sure that where we got data sources, we know what the information is, where it's coming from and why, how it's fit for purpose for our sub-region. And then the KPIs around, going back to our strategy, which we've all signed off as to how our KPIs are, there might be a political or an aspirational leverages, I get those, but at the end of the day, we've got KPIs that we have to base on the practicality of what's happening and going to happen, particularly in line of things like fast tracking. Just on top of that one while I'm on page 39, because I am going to go back to Bruce as well, is the first one, and I agree, number of iwi-led and partnership projects, absolutely agree, doing that work through our JMAs, etc. But I put the word localism because, and also having those conversations with Waikato Tainui as well with our economic development, absolutely around iwi economic development and procurements and things like those areas. But actually I'm hearing, and I'd like to hear from other councils, is I'm hearing that people are looking for not just big contractors doing stuff or how do we KPI measure that, but it's also how are we measuring local versus all, not just iwi. Or projects, right? Is there local projects being led? Rather than, okay, so iwi-led projects, great. I'm just trying to understand where, yeah, as an example. It's not there. I'm just trying to put in, I guess we've gone through local government with localism. It was a big conversation around themes of local government and our strategy. And are we tracking it or not? I'm not going to die in the ditch of it. I'm just, this is a topic. Last one for me, and I guess what Bruce was saying at the beginning, when I look at these KPIs, and I think a lot of work's gone in and considered, so I appreciate that. How I would describe what Robert said earlier, what Bruce said at the beginning, if I did a mind map of these KPIs on one piece of paper, I don't see the connectivity between the KPIs as subjects together and the cohesiveness. And if it is, then the flow of the KPIs so that the whole picture, one, we've covered the main KPIs as a whole on one piece of paper and the interlinking of those KPIs, but they feel a little bit disconnected, which I think is a bit what Bruce was saying at the beginning around one. So to me, if I mind map these KPIs on an axis, is there cohesiveness around the whole, and therefore is there any gaps that we haven't picked up?
Yep. I think I understand what you're saying.
Just before I go to Carolyn, it's just a question online from Nanaya in respect of iwi deliberation. Which iwi was your question referring to, or was it a number of iwi, Jack?
Your number.
The only references, I was really more referencing localism, because we've got a status of iwi-led partnerships and projects.
Okay.
Yeah, in delivery.
So it's more generic.
It's a more of a generic.
Yes.
It's not about the iwi or anything.
Yep.
It's about we absolutely on the pages of supporting those projects with the iwi, which whoever they are.
Okay.
It's more if we take in the lens of localism, because that's a really strong thing for us and also I think in local government, and we're doing KPIs around what's happening in our region. That was
okay.
nothing to do with iwi. as such. It was more of a reference of projects in what's localism.
Okay, thank you. Carolyn, then Bruce, and
Thank
then
you.
Sarah.
Now, I'm unsure if this question actually ought land here, but we seem to be a fairly broad remit about what we're discussing under this report. And I just go back to Councillor Thompson's question or commentary about protection of productive land, essentially. So, and I know it's been flagged here in the past about tracking loss of highly productive land for food production purposes, for not just urban growth, but also for renewable energy solar farms. So where is that conversation to be had? How and where?
So thinking aloud, if we go down the track of an indicator like loss of highly productive land, then we could map that in terms of loss to forestry, loss to urbanization, loss to whatever. So it could be something we picked up on, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just don't think we ought to be losing sight of that.
Bruce, then Sarah.
Yeah, so I won't labour the point. I just wanted to, first of all, acknowledge the fact that Robert and co, we all know it's a draft, and that's the point, and this is the purpose of what we're doing now, is giving some feedback in order to shape and filter where it might land. So, and it was sparked by some comments that you've just made, Mayor Jackie. So the notion of localism versus regionalism and all of those things, that's what I meant by the sweet spot. Where is this system going to be landing? And in my comments to you, I think I also made that comment about, have we got the right data source? Because to know that all the data sources in our region is a massive job. And all I'm saying is you may need to talk really widely to even know of the existence of some of these data sets. And I use the example of Hamilton City Council, Sarah, because in the ones that are listed there, number of trees and shrubs planted, number of community engagement events. I know that data is held by the Nature in the City program. It's sitting there waiting to be harvested. But then the question becomes, at what scale are you going to do the harvest? Are you going to stick to the sub-regional unit? And that's why my reason for raising that is I thought the data source that was specified was not really the data source that was relevant to this particular issue. So sorry to keep on about it, but yeah, thanks for your draft. I understand it's a draft, and I think it's going to need quite a wide set of reviewing to make sure that we really have got the right data sets informing the right question.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to answer some of those questions because I think it is quite important clarification for the team when I go back to them. So in my head, this was reporting at a future-proof scale. So we wouldn't be chopping and dicing the data down to a district by district or a SA2 unit by SA2 unit scale if we were using population data. And I think you're right that cause and effect thing is an important component we need to pick up on. The water ones, as I say, we found particularly hard because there's not, other than the land and water database, which is a regional council sponsored database nationwide, that you can cut and dice down to report on the region. There's not a lot of easily available sub-regional data that we could call on. And so we have to go back and redevelop those completely. Yeah, this is really useful conversation. It has, I'll be fair to the staff, it has proven, because I've taken this through all of my working groups, the water working group, the transport working group, the policy and planners working group. They've all struggled with the task for the same reasons that you're struggling with the tasks. How do we winnow down to a few indicators, still reflect everything we do and are relevant and helpful?
Sarah.
Sorry. Yeah, briefly, just really supporting what Carolyn said around use of productive land and forestation, for example, bringing that in along with rural subdivisions that are large lot, and I mean, there's been at least one that's kind of come through recently on Hamilton's periphery that ideally, we wouldn't be seeing. So that, how are we measuring that one, which is again one of the key things we're trying to avoid, is these big, large lot. No offense to Tamihere, but subdivisions that don't use land well.
Okay. Further, I think we've had a good roundup in terms of further thinking for Robert and the team to undertake on this. And then Robert will come back to us in due course. When are you thinking of doing that, Robert, just in terms of timeframes?
So I'd like to have a suite of some KPIs and measures for the next annual report. So I'm not going to come back to you with it in a holus bolus package like this. I'll come back and say, here's where we've landed on a couple of topics that we think we can turn around, some data that's able to be put into this annual report, which is September.
Okay, thank you. Well, the recommendation before us on page 40 is receive that report. I can have a mover, Mayor Jackie, seconded by Mayor Adrian.
The only question I have is the feedback, obviously, that we've given, because we've received it, we've given feedback. So should that be reflected in the recommendation? Just asking.
We could have something along be received and noting the feedback received.
Because I think, we haven't just received it,
Yes.
we have discussed it.
Yeah.
Quite in depth.
If mover and
And we need to
seconder are
reflect
happy
that
with
in our recommendation. Thank you.
Okay. Nothing further. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Yes. So we'll move to the last item on the open agenda, and that's on page 40, and that's the Independent Chair's brief report. I'm quite happy to move receipt of that.
I can see
Sarah.
Yep. Thank you. Oh, you're taking as read?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, all right. Thanks. Thank you, Chair, for this report. In terms of for a future one, we discussed this morning the idea of engaging with the likes of the Waikato Chamber of Commerce and others around some of what we are trying to achieve, say in the public transport space. Is that something that a conversation that you would have as chair, or is it something that the members would do?
That will be a conversation probably in the first instance for focusing on our discussion this morning, the informal one, Robert, and it might involve Robert and I. So we'll have a discussion around that. The same with a number of issues that either I pick up or Robert picks up in that.
Okay, it would be, so
that's what you, for want of a better word, pay us for.
Yes. Update us then on how that goes when we come to the next committee.
Yeah,
that would be excellent.
Yeah. So between Robert's report and my report, the ability to report back in terms of those initiatives and discussions during that intervening period.
Okay, excellent. And again, sorry, on the transport front, I think where we get to in terms of discussions with relevant parties around the next GPS would also be really helpful.
Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, it's Mayor Jackie.
Yes, thank you. A bit of a segue from you, Sarah. Thank you. Great to get your report. But I guess my comment on here would be, and I'll just give you an example. So no disrespect to your acumen and what you're doing, and I think the process is good. But when it says you've annoyed my curiosity, is because meetings with DIA regional director as an example. And so I think in some of these things, because
just want a bit of teasing out
teasing,
in terms of the topic.
Yes, and sometimes it's appropriate and sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
But I guess because some of these strategic stakeholder engagements that you do on behalf of us, I think, without making it onerous for you, I think just some, yeah.
Happy to do that.
Makes sense.
And on that basis, some it's appropriate, and certainly I could tease out that DIA discussion.
Or what, I'm just giving that as one
But
example. Yeah.
for example, when I pick up my discussions with, say, mayors and chairs and other representatives, I don't report on those, so I might use that information in terms of discussion, but the value of those from my point of view, and hopefully from those who I talk to, is that they are off the radar and that ability for a free and frank.
Yeah, and it's not, I don't want a big story, just a couple of points.
Yes.
I guess the thing is, some of those are quite important meetings where there's a subject and then some points or whatever.
Happy to do that.
Thank you.
Yep. It's been moved and seconded. There's nothing further. I'll put receipt of the independent chair's report. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Sarah seconded receipt of that. Now, that brings us to the end of the open agenda. What I propose to do is that we will do the resolutions to go into public excluded, then we'll adjourn, we'll have a 15-minute morning tea break, and then we'll go into the public excluded agenda. Now, Andrew, you've done your meeting, so you're all set now. Okay. Very good. So on page 44, there is, thank you, moved by Sarah, seconded by Mayor Adrian. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. So we're now in public excluded, and I will adjourn. We'll reconvene at 11:15 for the 8.1 item regarding the fast track update. Thank you.